Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, August 14th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate for the 2024 presidential election. Now, President Trump has practically said that he is going to be running for re-election. He has just said that his biggest decision is whether he is going to announce now or later, but has already made up his mind. And considering that 2024 national polls seem to be showing showing Donald Trump with a very high advantage over practically every other Republican, it calls into question, who does Donald Trump run for in 2024? Now, the initial and obvious choice, at least from 2 years ago, might have been Vice President Mike Pence. But following a lot of statements from President Trump and Mike Pence and endorsements crossing paths, you have found that President Trump himself does not seem to like Mike Pence to the extent that he did back in the 2016 presidential election. I think all eyes are looking to the 2024 nomination as which Republican can unseat President Biden. And the answer is many. But Donald Trump as the top contender here really just shuts out practically every other candidate in terms of viability. Many of them have openly said that if Donald Trump does decide to run again in 2024, they will decide to not run themselves. You've heard that from Nikki Haley. You've heard that from the likes of senators, representatives, governors, those who are very closely associated with President Trump, who would rather have him on their side rather than make him an enemy. So, as we see all of this consideration ramping up for who Donald Trump is going to choose, I've decided that today we will take a look and rank the candidates that are in the potential list here. At least this is what we have really been seeing in terms of top names: Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, Nikki Haley, Larry Hogan, these very well-known Republican names, and really just see where they are ranked personally for me in terms of who provides the most electability for President Trump, who is the best candidate that he chooses to run with. The S tier is the best tier, the best one that you can have on this ranking, the F obviously being the worst, so we're going to rank accordingly. Now, it is a very well-known thing that vice presidential candidates can add or detract from a ticket. In 2008, Sarah Palin very much was a detractor to the McCain ticket. When you take a look at 2016, Mike Pence probably added to Donald Trump's electability. You had someone who had presidential tendencies, who had the ability to really keep things more contained rather than what President Trump had done. And it was sort of as if Mike Pence was the antithesis of where Donald Trump was, of who he was as a candidate. So sometimes they add, sometimes they detract, and that's what we'll really be discussing here when we go from candidate to candidate to candidate, because there's a lot to talk about. We're not going to spend too much time on each individual candidate, more so on the more important ones, but really just ranking the ones that we see thus far and what they would provide Donald Trump on a potential ticket. So to start, we have Steve Bannon, who I am immediately going to put in the F tier. I don't think that there is really any real consideration that he is a one, viable candidate, or two, just an overall good person. I think objectively speaking, Steve Bannon has promoted a lot of conspiracy theories and partaken in a lot of things that President Trump likely would not want to be associated with. Donald Trump, very much grabbed in and held on to Steve Bannon for a significant portion of his presidency, but it's very clear that he is not the future of the GOP, and Donald Trump needs someone like that. Candace Owens as a potential vice presidential nominee, I think maybe comes around to the C tier. I don't think she's this awe-inspiring, super well, known Republican that many people would like to think. I think those who watch conservative media know her name and might recognize her, and those who agree with her might like her. But realistically speaking, what I see is that at the end of the day, I don't find her to be this electable and additive candidate in a way that I think other candidates might. I think she's relatively inexperienced, and I think based off of a lot of the things that have propelled her to, well-known recognition amongst conservative media, also doubles as baggage as someone who jumps onto the Trump ticket. I think Trump in itself has said a lot of things that prop himself up and label him as this outsider type of candidate, but for Candace Owens, I don't think it has the same effect, and I also think that she's just relatively one of the weaker candidates without any electoral experience, because that's necessary to add on to the Trump ticket. Charlie Baker, I don't think Trump would go for it, but I think you'd be somewhere around a B, maybe even A tier. I would say B tier for right now. And I say that because there is a portion of the Republican Party that Donald Trump's side of the GOP would call rhinos. But that's about 7, 10, sometimes even, depending on the poll, 15% of the party that identifies themselves as these more moderate, liberal, even maybe Republicans. Obviously not left-leaning, but if Republicans in any circumstance were to be liberal, Charlie Baker would be the perfect iteration of that. I would say B tier because he provides at least a different point of view. And he's also, I would say, more electable than Donald Trump, but he would never make it to a primary. I think Charlie Baker offers something that many of the candidates do not in his ability to win in blue states. I don't think he'd win Massachusetts. I don't think he'd help Trump win Massachusetts. But what I do think is that that level of governing and that level of campaigning has already worked in a solid blue state. In swing states, I think it'd be very effective. As for Condoleezza Rice, I don't think that she would decide to be a candidate here, but I'm going to go ahead and say B tier, representing an old version of the Republican Party from what we know today. Again, you are talking a well-known Republican, but not exactly someone who I would say represents the Trump wing of the GOP. She has been very clearly hands-off, stepping back away from electoral politics and more focused on, her time at Stanford, things of that nature, the Hoover Institute, whatever it might be. But it is very clear that right now, she isn't the current representation of the GOP, but that actually might somewhat help her, I think. So B tier for right now, I would say, Donald Trump would gain a little bit, but also wouldn't be this awe-inspiring candidate that would propel him to victory as some of these other candidates might be able to do. Dan Crenshaw, I'm going to go ahead and say D tier. I think that he's extremely outspoken, but not in a good way. I think if you were to put Dan Crenshaw in any type of competitive statewide race, not necessarily in Texas, but let's say we prop him in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan, I think it'd be very difficult to see how he wins. I also don't think that he provides much in terms of electoral capability. I mean, being from a representative district in Texas doesn't exactly give you that bump statewide that you might need. Donald Trump is going to win Texas if he decides to run in 2024 anyway, but it will still be competitive, and I don't think that really there is much there electorally for the Trump campaign. As we see here, I'm not even going to entertain the possibility of the Trumps being on the ticket. I don't think that's something that really makes a lot of sense. I would say Ivanka Trump makes a lot more sense than Eric and Donald, but for right now, I'd go ahead and say that these two are going to be, or these three are going to be on the relatively lower end of the scale, simply because this would never happen, and I don't think nepotism sounds good to the American public. Matt Gaetz, I'm going to say F tier. I don't really want to talk too much about him. I think that his scandals speak for himself, and I think there's a reason why many Republicans are starting to distance themselves, and why the only few Republicans that really associate so heavily with Matt Gaetz are Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert. And there's a reason for that. And I think it's all going to ultimately end up harming them in the future, especially if any of them have any presidential aspirations. Greg Abbott, I don't really think also is this, awe-inspiring candidate as well. Similar to many of these other Republicans here, he's just a Republican governor. He's not that popular in the state of Texas. He's on track to win re-election because of the national environment that we are in. But I don't think that, he comes into this as this very well-known or well-liked Republican as well. I think there's also a lot of baggage in terms of the collapse of the electrical grid in the state of Texas or the Uvalde shooting that happened under his term as governor. He is someone who has a lot that can carry with him that I think will ultimately detract from the Trump campaign. But so will many other candidates, which is why I place him around C. I would say he's one of the more boring candidates as well. Definitely not this awe-inspiring, inspirational type of candidate. Now, I've already made my assumptions clear about Nikki Haley. I do believe that she at one point will be president of the United States. And while it is just a hunch, I think there's a reason behind it. I think the GOP, in terms of wanting to break this stereotype that they are, anti-women, anti-minority, these are things that the GOP, at least the Democratic Party, tries to paint and associate with the GOP. And, not to say that Nikki Haley should only be chosen because of her identity. I do think that it helps because she has risen to a very well-known place of recognition within the GOP, while also being a woman of color. I think that's something you very rarely see within the Republican Party. Just take a look at national leadership for the GOP. Take a look at practically any, and I say practically because there are exceptions, but practically any GOP senator, any GOP representative, and you'll know exactly what I'm saying. I think the Democratic Party's argument against the GOP in terms of, this exact realm, that the GOP doesn't support women, that the GOP is anti-minority, these arguments are thrown out of the window the moment that Nikki Haley is chosen. I also think that just her as someone who can appease both Trump candidates or Trump bases, moderates, independents, whatever it might be, I think she adds a lot to the ticket, and I don't imagine there's much baggage with her. Yes, she served as governor from the state of South Carolina. Yes, she served in the United Nations, but realistically speaking, she's one of the lesser scandal-ridden Republicans, and I think that she would provide an electoral boost just simply because she is a very good speaker. I also think that she just provides something that the GOP simply has been unable to provide, and that is minority and women representation I mean, the GOP has never had a woman on a presidential ticket, even as vice president, in terms of a major nominee, because Ted Cruz had Carly Fiorina back in 2016. But beyond that, you haven't seen it happen. And I think that will be something that will be a big first for the GOP, and I think it will help them because it breaks the stereotype. It breaks the mold for what you otherwise might expect. Larry Hogan's going to join the ranks of Charlie Baker. I think that, both Baker and him are impressive in their abilities to win in 2018 in these very solid blue states, but that doesn't translate to electoral victories in the general election. I think that, again, Hogan, especially as an outspoken critic of Trump, is someone who, probably wouldn't work well with Trump, but definitely could try to serve as this unifier, someone who could say, I didn't even vote for Trump, but here I am running with him because I believe that the biggest threat to America isn't Trump, but rather President Biden. I could see that easily playing up well amongst the American public, but I could also see it backfiring. I could also see, the downsides of that, a decreased and less enthused GOP, which is why he doesn't jump up into the A or S tier, because while he has a lot of benefits, probably has a lot of things that are going to detract from him as a candidate on that ticket. For right now, I'd say he'd join the B ranks, maybe even C, realistically speaking, because of how outspoken he has been against President Trump. But had he been just more so quiet and at least less critical, as Charlie Baker was, then he'd be somewhere around the B tier. Next, you have Josh Hawley, who I don't think is really going to have many future presidential aspirations as much as you would might like. I think that he serves as an F-tier candidate. I think he's very much a replication of President Trump in terms of the way that he now campaigns, in terms of the way that he now treats his office and, the statements that he makes. I don't think that he serves as this youthful or revitalized voice that the GOP desperately needs as they enter into a new era of the Republican Party that needs to be redefined. I don't think Josh Hawley is that candidate. Mike Pence, I would say he isn't going to do well with Donald Trump, but I can imagine that if he does decide to run with Trump, that it does return us back to where we were. It might be boring, it might be what we're used to, but it's what voters know, and it's what voters have voted for in the past. Changing anything up, with Donald Trump on the ticket means that voters are in for a new ticket. Even with Trump at the top of the ticket, they aren't voting for the same two that they voted for twice in 2016, and practically half the nation did in 2020. Mike Pence would be a return to that. I don't rank him as an S tier because I think there may be some momentary drawbacks amongst the Make America Great Again crowd that believes in, the movement against Mike Pence. But I will also say that Donald Trump definitely could try to use this as a unifying effort, show that, yes, they may have had their differences and they've, really talked things through about January 6th and the balance of, and transfer of power, and how Donald Trump does not want to take that out against Mike Pence. I could see this playing up well, and I think that it's something that the Republican Party could potentially explore, Donald Trump could potentially think about. For right now, I'd say A. I don't think he's as strong as Nikki Haley, but I think he's up there. Now, Kristi Noem in the state of South Dakota, as much as Democrats would try to paint her out, and want to paint her out at least, as someone who was, entirely on COVID conscience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I don't think that's something that will be relevant for the 2024 election. Yes, she has scandals to her name. Yes, she has things that will negatively, look amongst the American public for what she has done, or at least the way she has governed in the state of South Dakota, but I will also caution that and say, sometimes voters just simply don't care. So for right now, I would say A tier. I think she reminds me a lot of Mike Pence. I think she is a rising star within the GOP, and I think that's why I really see her as this very good candidate. And again, breaking the narrative, breaking the norm for Republicans across this country. Lindsey Graham, I'd say, is about a D tier. I don't think he's as bad as Matt Gaetz or Josh Hawley or Steve Bannon, but I do think he's probably, worse than Hogan, worse than Abbott. I don't think he adds much. I think, in fact, you could really see him as this, bad Republican governor. I just don't imagine that he's going to do too well. If he was to be the VP nom, I don't think he'd add to the Trump ticket. Marco Rubio, I think, might have a slight bump in the state of Florida, but I don't think he's as strong as a Pence nomination would be, as a Noem nomination would be, as a Haley nomination would be. He provides some level of a boost in Florida, but beyond that, you really don't see much else. I don't think that his strategy has worked before. I think there's a reason why Republican voters rejected him in the past. I don't think he comes across as genuine. I think Donald Trump is looking for somebody else. Yes, Marco Rubio as a Latino man does help the GOP in that regard. I think that is also something about, again, breaking away from this identity that the GOP doesn't want to entirely hold all the time, because it is something that will make them less electable, especially as the country becomes more non-white. Marco Rubio, I think specifically also has proven himself electorally in Florida, but I can't say that I'd imagine himself proving himself electorally in other regions of the country when the most of the country is not like Florida. For right now, I'd say B for where he is. I also think that there is just some drawbacks of choosing someone who ran against you and openly called you a liar and a con artist. There's definitely some things that you don't want to associate with your name, and that would be one of them. Nikki Haley endorsed Marco Rubio, campaigned against him, but against Trump. But you would also have to say, she did serve in the Trump administration. She very much has been respected and, apologetic to President Trump, and definitely has won back his base. So I'd say I'd keep her up in the S tier. Mike Lindell, we're going to go F tier. We're not going to talk about that. My Pillow is definitely not something that I wanted to get into in today's video. We're just going to go ahead and talk about him being ranked in the F tier. I think that he'd be a very unfortunate candidate, definitely not going to add much, and is just entirely caught up in conspiracy theories well beyond what is helpful. As for Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, I don't really see much for him either. This is not someone that I've been super, impressed about as a potential nominee. He's decided, he's visiting around some parts of the country, considering a presidential bid. He has no chance, and I don't think he adds at all to President Trump's ticket if he was to run. Paul Ryan, on the other hand, I would say I would expect to be somewhere around the A to B tier. Now, hear me out. I think that Paul Ryan himself is someone who really is a very good speaker. I think he is able to win over the masses when he's given the opportunity to speak to said masses. But I also do recognize that he's a failed vice presidential candidate from 2012. There's some drawbacks of that as well, but I will say that Paul Ryan is someone who has largely represented a different version of the GOP. For me, he represents that revitalized type of GOP Tea Party movement back into the Trump era and a combined force that could be electorally powerful in 2024. So I'd keep him in the A tier for right now. Rand Paul, I don't think is that prominent as much as he was before. Remember when he was the 2016 frontrunner? That was quite interesting. I'd say maybe B or C tier. I don't think he's this, strong or well-recognized name, or he's well-recognized, but well-liked name within the GOP much more. For right now, I would say, he's going to say in the C tier for the sake of this video. I just simply don't see much for him. Mitt Romney, I don't think this would work well at all. Mitt Romney voted to convict Trump. I'd say for that alone, that baggage is just something you would never want to associate with you as a VP nom. He might be individually a strong candidate on the presidential level. Again, yes, I would say that. But I don't think he'd be strong as a VP nom, and I don't think there's any walking back the comments that he's made against President Trump. Now, the next candidate I'm going to rank is Ron DeSantis. He would serve as another S-tier candidate, very similar to my presidential rankings. Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis don't seem to like each other too much, and I say that entirely honestly. I think they would both provide each other a very good electoral boost, but right now you're really seeing a war between the two, even though neither of them has officially announced that they're running in 2024. Ron DeSantis serves as one of the prominent GOP figures on some of our polls here, enough to a point where in some of these, Donald Trump is only winning by 9 points nationwide against Ron DeSantis. It's quite embarrassing to be losing as a former president, or at least almost losing to some extent, to a former governor. Now, the overall average puts Trump ahead by about 30 points more than Ron DeSantis, but looking at polls from a year ago, Trump was ahead by 40, 50, 60 points, depending on the pollster. Today, that is narrowed down to 30, and there's one candidate who has dramatically risen in the polls, while the rest have remained stagnant and the same. That's Governor Ron DeSantis. I think that his ability to remain popular in one of the most populous states in the country, in one of those swinging states in the country, and he's on track for victory larger than Rubio, larger than Trump in 2020, larger than Trump, especially in 2016, larger than practically any Republican victory in the governorship in Florida in the 21st century. That says something about being electable within these swing states, within these swing districts, and I think that it provides something that Donald Trump desperately needs, and it's coverage within some of these states. Rubio might provide it in the state of Florida. I don't expect Rubio to expand his outreach beyond that state, but Ron DeSantis, I definitely could imagine him doing it. I also think Ron DeSantis, similar to Nikki Haley, at some point in time, will be president of the United States. And then we're going to try to speed run these last few, spending a lot of time talking about these candidates. Ben Sasse, I would say, very similar to Romney, has made some very negative comments against President Trump, has toned them down since Trump has won the presidency. I'm going to keep him in the D tier, but again, his votes, his history against Trump, it's very clear that he's not entirely aligned with the party that is the Make America Great Again party, and that's something that, Ben Sasse might face in terms of a potential primary opponent in the future, but for right now, I'd say, he's going to stay in the D tier. I don't think he'd add much to the campaign. Rick Scott wasn't super electable in the state of Florida, didn't really, I would say, do as well as maybe he could have, especially as the incumbent governor. I'd say he'd join Marco Rubio in being a B tier, but I don't think he'd help in Florida as much as we might think. Scott Walker from Wisconsin, maybe the Midwestern appeal, but realistically speaking, don't think there's much there for the GOP. I think, looking at his 2018 loss, it's a testament in itself. For right now, I'd say that Scott Walker's going to remain in the B tier. Yes, there is some advantage of having someone from the state of Wisconsin, but realistically speaking, the future is also keeping yourself prominent in Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, states that you also, as the GOP, can't forget about because they have been moving steadily towards the left. Ted Cruz, I don't think is a strong candidate. I think, or not super strong. I would say C tier, definitely could provide something, but not much electorally. He doesn't come from a state that the Democratic Party is on track to win in 2024. He's not going to turn much around. And also, again, similar to Rubio, has made some pretty questionable comments about the president. Obviously, he's become much more Trumpy, much more willing to back the former president. But I will say that, I still think there are some drawbacks of having your former opponents running against you in 2024 or running with you in 2024 from 2016. Tim Scott, I think I would rate him as an A-tier candidate. I also think that Tim Scott might run for president himself. I know that seems to be somewhat of a stretch to some, but I would honestly say that I buy it. I think Tim Scott is a strong enough candidate that he could win if he wins the primary. I think the primary would be his biggest challenge. I think in the general, he would very well be able to win, but it's no shoo-in for any of these candidates. Tom Cotton in the state of Arkansas won, I think, in 2014 for the first time. I'd say somewhere C, D. I don't think he's really this super powerful, strong candidate that people paint him out to be. Doesn't offer anything electorally, and he is an iteration of Trump. Yes, he was before the Trump era, but I can't say that he hasn't tried to practically be him. He seems to be actually exploring a potential bid for 2024, which is beyond me. But for right now, I'm going to say Tom Cotton remains in the D tier. I would say that's where I'm most comfortable characterizing him as such. And for the final person, we have Tucker Carlson, who is a very well-known name from Fox News. And while many people on the GOP side think that Tucker Carlson in the future could be this presidential candidate, could be electable, I don't think that is true. Donald Trump winning as a celebrity didn't exactly happen because of the fact solely that he was a celebrity. He had things to add to his name. He had business experience. He had recognition, and he was a household name. Tucker Carlson is a household name amongst those who watch Fox News, which, to be fair, is not the majority of the nation. Tucker Carlson could be this prominent GOP nominee if he played his cards right, but he just says so many things that I think he's too much baggage to add to the Trump campaign. For the outspokenness that he has, it makes him prominent, but it also makes him unelectable. And for that reason, I'm going to put Tucker Carlson in the D ranking, lower than many other people might, but that's where I see it for right now. So in terms of the best contenders for President Trump, A and above, Mike Pence. Sounds crazy, but I think it could work. You also have Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota. Paul Ryan, former Speaker of the House and 2012 VP nominee under Mitt Romney. Tim Scott, senator from South Carolina. Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina, former UN ambassador. Then you have Governor Ron DeSantis from the state of Florida, and those are the candidates that I personally think would be the strongest VP nominees for President Trump. The rest could be okay choices if things are done correctly. Obviously, the F tier are ones that I would entirely avoid like the plague, like monkeypox, and I would treat it as such. Those candidates should never be touched, never be propped up to positions of power within a Trump campaign, Trump administration, because realistically speaking, they're only baggage, and that's all they're going to do to a ticket and really make it difficult for them to win in the general election. The candidates in between are iffy, questionable. Yes, maybe they could be, have a redemption arc, but realistically speaking, I don't see much for them, especially on a ticket with President Trump. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.